drove over here and forgot. And we're going to talk about lilacs today. We'll have a little bit of question and answer as we get closer, but if something really piques you and you need to have the answer right now, and you can't wait, then just raise your hand or holler at me or something like that, and we'll get there. I always try and find fun little nuggets that are either about the plant, or there's some other things that we'll talk about that will help you grow lots of other plants up here. The lilac, when you look up mythology or folklore about lilac, it's really interesting to see how many different nations grew the plant for a very long time. There's Greek mythology, there's Russian folklore, old for us is 200 years in America, but we're talking centuries and centuries of folklore about the plants. Most of it has to do with nymphs or fairies, which I thought was really interesting. The Russians have you take the flowers over a newborn and it'll bring wisdom. And that was about as diverse. There's bad fairies and there's good fairies and all these other things, but a lot of them have to do with these forest creatures that some of them want to kidnap, some of them want to bless you, there's a bunch of different stuff, but it's fun to look up. Medicinal, I didn't really see anything that was medicinal value except for smiles are good for you, and they smell good and that'll help you smile, right? The plants themselves, I'm going to start with roots and I'll go to the top and we'll get into pruning and companion plants. There's several different species. The ones that we carry, Waters Nursery is 60 years old, and we've been working with the growers probably 40 years, because it was a time when Harold and the family grew a lot of the plants in Skull Valley and stuff like that, but then they started contracting with growers. We're picking plants that are very specifically for Zone 7, which is where you're at up here. So it's not, I wonder if this will grow. You can read the labels and stuff like that. We encourage you to do that. But if it's on our lot, it's for this area. So we've gone through that trouble. The growers recognize that we're kind of picky. We're going to ask for credit or send stuff back if it comes in a fashion that isn't going to work for our customers. So we get pick of the litter. Monrovia is a case in point where a lot of people from California recognize the name. They actually have growing stations all Oregon and East Coast as well and stuff like that. I don't want to be too specific because I don't know them all, but I do know that peony is one of my favorites to grow up here, and it makes a great companion plant for the lilac. The Monrovia rep for the state of Arizona lives in Preston. So he's held to a higher standard. He's in our nursery all the time. So if it has a Monrovia label on it, it is, as you would expect, it's a better product, or it's as good as it gets. And we do buy peony from others, but I happen to like that particular cultivator. The root systems here, you're going to want to add acid. And you can do that in a couple of different ways. You can do it with our fertilizer, we'll have cottonseed casings and some other materials that will break down to acid. Gypsum works because, one of the reasons gypsum works is because as it breaks down, it turns into sulfuric acid, which is good for the breaking down the clay and stuff like that. Personally, I go straight for acid, which is humic acid. This is created as a mulch product. And that's actually, it's as close to granulated mulch as you can get. But we refer to this as a soil activator. It isn't a fertilizer, but your plants will look like they've been fertilized because you're balancing out the pH in the plant and in the soil. So it's a double whammy there, where the minerals are easier to be taken up because they're loosened up in the soil, the bonds have been broken, and the plant is in better health and it can take up the nutrients that are now available. It's like yourself feeling a little puny and you don't know what's going on, balance out your pH. Have a little vinegar, with the mother in it, a couple of times a week, and you'll suddenly feel better. That's your pH. It's potential hydrogen, and the science of it is not relevant to what we're doing. It's just that our soil's out of whack and our water's out of whack, so you want to add acid to everything. I buy a bag of acid and I empty it on my yard once a year, and I buy it with the intent of not storing it. I just put it on everything, except for stuff that's in pots, because you're buying potting soil, which is has a better balance. When you plant these, you don't want to plant them any deeper than they're already growing, and there's very few plants that this doesn't apply to, so you can use this on anything. But you'll see all these roots on top, or just the stems coming out. You don't want this to sink, the plant to sink into the soil. You can put a little mulch around it if you want, but this is durable enough. All this wood made it through the winter. The light green is the brand new growth. So dig the hole as deep as this is, not twice as deep, but you can go twice as wide. And you amend the soil 1/3 mulch to 2/3 native soil. You can put the acid in the bottom of the hole, put some of your general plant food about halfway up as you're layering it in. And then when you water it, you soak it, walk away for a little bit, come back, turn your hose up pretty loud, no attachment, and run it down in that zone between this root ball and the hole, and several times all the way around, and you'll see it kind of boil, and that is the sand in our soil, which is just decomposed granite, filling in the air pockets. So you don't want the air pockets. Unless it is a solid root ball with big roots that are spinning around, I don't manually cut the roots or anything like that. If it's really root bound, then I will. I'll pull some apart, but I'll just cut them in 2 or 3 spots. The hose with this technique is hydroponically kind of blowing apart that root ball and filling it in with the good soil at the same time. When that settles, you will have some puncture marks, or scars, if you will, and you can come back and fill it in with mulch or your leftover native soil. Make a dam whether you are on a drip or not. Just a little 3 inches deep of your leftover mulch and soil. If it's all mulch, that's great, because as that breaks down, that's going to feed your dirt. Most recently, I put in 12 fruit trees out in a flat area, and I planted bigger trees. So we're talking 7 to 10 gallons that would produce fruit right away. Not a single worm in any of that, because it's all decomposed granite. There's no real organic material for worms and stuff like that to eat. That's a point where even a grub would be nice, but there is nothing there. And you're adding that by mulch. The bucket is 100% mulch. I can't emphasize this enough. Don't go 50-50. Don't make the whole perfect by adding too much or going with your own combo that you brought from Oregon. It's a different world here. If you have questions about these, it's best to ask someone here rather than Googling this stuff. And I'm not trying to keep you off the internet or anything like that, but I can't tell you how many times I've been to someone's house, given them advice about planting. They've gone and looked it up. They've modified what I've told them and what they found online, and then they blame me for their plant dying. And the reality is that what they're reading online is from a different state. They're planting information from Oregon or Pennsylvania, and it's not the same. We don't have the same soil. We don't have you're 5,000 feet closer to the sun, and that does make a difference. Coastal areas have reflective properties in the air because there's so much humidity in the air because they're coastal, and here you don't have that. it's a direct line. The radiation is just different here. So plant now while it's cool. The rule of thumb at 5,000 feet, 4,500 to 6,000 feet, is anything that's grown in a pot can be planted any time of the year. So you don't have to wait. You can plant in the middle of the summer. I personally don't like to plant when there's snow on the ground. This is as much winter as I want, what we have here in Preston. So, but you can if you'd like. So coming up the stalk, you see how this is cut back. This is brand new growth. And all it is the flower stem. This piece here isn't going to bloom, but it will in the spring of next year. The new growth doesn't necessarily represent the new buds, but that is, when this hardens up, that's where you're going to get your flowers, okay? And this is kind of, you can use this for any plant that needs to be deadheaded. Deadhead means maintenance. You can leave this, once it's established, you'll pull up to properties here that are 25 and 30 years old with horrible dirt, and there'll be a great big lilac in the front yard. Once they're established, they're incredibly durable. The one thing that they do not like is to be sitting in mud, they don't want moisture, they want to be well drained. If you are not on a slope that will drain naturally, then when you dig a hole and you think that there's some clay in there, then you go down deeper on one side, just narrowly, of that hole, deeper than the hole. And when you're backfilling, it'll drain out of that. You follow me? You're kind of building a French drain into the hole. If you are replacing a plant that died, and you're going into an existing home, pull everything out and literally smell the dirt. And if it stinks, then it's got a clay bottom to it, and there's some rot. And you want to break that up. The acid will break that up better than almost anything else. But then just be aware of it. You don't want to subject a new plant to what killed your old plant. So it could just be something as simple as grubs. And if it is, then get some grub bait. There's different levels of toxicity. One is very specifically, I think it's built for high yield. I don't use the grub-free zone because it will kill everything, and there's a particular application for that. It'll kill all the worms and everything else in the soil. I use the one that's built for the garden, for fruits and vegetables, in case I want to put some herbs underneath the plant or a tomato next to it or something like that. I don't want something that toxic in the ground. So as this is coming up, this plant's going to flower now, as you can see. I'll go over some different species with you here in a second, but this is as important as it gets. When this is finished playing out, when the buds start to crisp up a little bit, or it's just bloomed as much as you want it to bloom, take off just the blooms. If you want to trim, you can trim at this point. And if you cut it dramatically, what you're going to do is cut your flowers off for next year. So you have to be very sensitive to that, and you can create more flowers by pruning it properly. But and you will read that they advocate pruning at different times of the year. Personally, my success has been the greatest when I take the buds off and let the plant do its thing. If I want to lower the plant, then I have to either do it in stages or resolve myself to no flowers. And I'm not into no flowers, so what I will do is I'll pick the bigger stalks out, and I'll cut 2 of them off this year. And I'm talking 6 inches off the ground. And then I'll do the next 2 next year. So I will always have my mound of flowers, but I'm reinvigorating the plant and bringing it down to size. Some of these, read the label, some of these species will get 10 foot tall pretty readily. And there's few things that are as pretty right now, but a big lilac in blooms, it's pretty spectacular. You get to know it's there, and you get to see it pulling up maybe, and you're walking underneath it. But if you want to bring the flowers down, then resolve yourself to very few, if no flowers next year, and just cut the thing in half. But that's the result of that, all right? You won't get as many flowers because you'll have messed with the growth cycle.
Is that what you've done here? It looks like there's two different levels of this plant.
Yeah, that's what is, the question is that what's happened on this particular specimen? And that is, this is coming straight from the grower, and they know how to stagger that so that they're going to send them to us when they bloom, right? So that they sell these. It's not going to be just, they don't sell very good when they're dormant, they're just sticks. These are totally deciduous, they lose all of their leaves in the wintertime, they go completely dormant. And that's a good segue to stop for a second and talk about the food. So there's a term in our industry called pushing, and that's what you're experiencing all throughout here with all these flowers and the smells. When the plant gets nice and vigorous, then they're on line in drips, or they're sprinkled regularly, and in that water is a balanced fertilizer, and they adjust the fertilizer to do what they want the plant to do so that it sells better. And it's not hurting the plant, but it is manipulating the chemistry of the plant. And you push more phosphate, and the phosphate is the blooming food. And so they push it to really bring up a bunch of, and then they send it to us. So very few of our plants overwinter. Here we sell 5 to 7 semis a week when it starts to warm up a little bit. And this is the first flush to fill the place up. So I bring that up because don't procrastinate. And if you see something you like, you should get it, because I can't tell you how many times I've told people this, and it's not a sales ploy, it's just managing expectations. I'll have 15, 20 really beautiful aspen over there, and somebody will say, well, I'm going to wait till next month, and they'll come in, there won't be any, and it could be in 3 days. And I've had people pull up with their trailer. I love aspen, and I just bought a farm out in Williamson Valley, and I want to find my driveway with them, and I'll take them all. And it happens more often than I can tell you. And so it takes me a while to get them back in, right? Sometimes they're not available until next year. Going up the plant, you're trimming as you want, you're selectively taking pieces out to adjust and control the growth. I like to keep my flowers where they're at, unless I'm using the plant as a screen or something like that. This is, I asked for these very specifically. There's 2 styles of blades on pruners. One is called an anvil, and one's called a bypass. This is a bypass. It's like, he must have just taken these out of the package, or is Eric that crazy about keeping things clean?
No.
So, the anvil is when you take a blade and it lays down on top of a flat piece of steel, right? And a bypass is going to be built like a pair of scissors. And the bypass is what you want to use unless you are pruning dead stuff. And these I don't consider dead heading, dead branches and stuff like that. You need a little extra leverage. You're smashing part of what you're cutting when you use an anvil. I have an anvil. I couldn't find it in my gardening tools this morning to bring. So this is the bypass. This is what I recommend. Different sizes. You can put it with gears on them, so where you can take great big branches off. You want to use something that's sharp, and you just take off the butts when they're spent. Even if you want to do something down, if you're grafting things, the sharper the blade, the higher the percentage of success. So it's all about not smashing the meristematic materials. So get some good ones. These are your tools of your trade. Don't just use anything. If you buy them from a yard sale or something like that, that's when you want to clean them. Your you'll see it in a lot of reviews about products, how to trim things and whatnot. They'll tell you to wash it with a particular percentage of chlorine in your water and all this other stuff. That's really for not spreading diseases. So if these are for your yard and you don't have disease, then you're not going from your yard to your neighbors and back and stuff like that, then you're pretty safe. You don't have to have a bottle of Clorox with you when you're working with your plants. But you'll see that very common thing that's in the paper. So deadheading is really important on this plant, and it's an opportunity to change the structure of the plant, whether you want to break it down or you want to have it keep going up. Having said that, these go completely dormant. The only one that doesn't, in my experience, is the bloomerang. Okay, this plant will get, depending on, you got to read the labels, this plant will get 10 foot tall if you let it. But you're in control, you own the clippers. So unless you go to Europe for 5 years, you're not very experienced. Tell your yard guys to whack it every once in a while, whatever you want to do. I genuinely don't believe that the growers exaggerate on these tags as far as the height and the width of the plant. They're, let's call it optimistic, because they're growing them in a perfect environment. You don't have a perfect environment. We don't bring stuff in that won't grow here, but they're not grown here, and they're not, it's just not the perfect environment. So I will throttle back, especially on the height, 10 to 20%. Oftentimes they'll get the width, but they won't get as tall, or it'll take them a whole lot longer. So the growth rate might be a little slower. This plant, bloomerang, has, as you can see, a smaller leaf, more dense structure. It doesn't go completely naked in the winter. It'll have some foliage still on it, but it's still considered deciduous. And but it'll bloom 2 or 3 times in a season, and it will bloom more if you deadhead it. This is harder to deadhead because it's got so many blooms. The blooms aren't as big, but it makes a great driveway plant, or just even if you're like lilac crazy, you can stagger them where you have your monsters in the back and your lower ones in the front, and keep that structure. And when you do something like this, it won't be like, oh, I think I smell a lilac. It's going to be, wow, where are the lilacs when you open the door? Morning and evening is when you're going to smell the plant. And remember to cut them, read the labels, augment your soil appropriately. The flowering food is phosphate. So when in the my method for phosphate, we have it, it's called superphosphate. That's the center number. All right. What they, as a kid, what they taught us was up, down, and all around. That was how the numbers meant, what the chemicals meant. So I bring that up because phosphate in that isn't referred to as the flowering food, it's referred to as the root food. And that's really what it is. The side effect is flowers. I'll put some in the hole when I'm planting it, some phosphate in the hole when I'm planting it. I will feed anything that's going to bloom in my yard phosphate in the spring, because that'll give it something to be able to roar back. I also feed phosphate going into, so probably 2 or 3 times a year I'm feeding phosphate. I'm feeding phosphate in the fall. And I do that because anything that goes dormant, and we're talking evergreens, your pines and stuff like that go dormant, but you just don't see it. But you see it on the trees that go back, and the shrubs that go back. So I'm feeding them phosphate in the fall because that's the only time the roots get to work for themselves. All the rest of the time, when there's leaves on the plant or flowers on the plant, the roots are working to support the plant. And so I give them a little dose in the fall. And that also ensures a good spring because the phosphate is then in the system. And if you're not, oh, it's starting to bloom, let's put some flowering stuff on. It's, we're prepping it to bloom. So right now red buds are just, I'm glad that last cold wasn't too cold. This week I should have just some stunning red buds because I feed them in the fall. My cherry trees, my peach trees, all that stuff I feed in the fall with phosphate. My perennial beds, I don't see much of the plant yet, but they got phosphate in the fall. And my coreopsis and all that stuff is just coming up and they're just going to be roaringly beautiful. Companion plants. When you plant something that's going to go naked in the fall, you might want some evergreen stuff in the back. Also, it's really a neat color. See, these put on leaves while they're blooming, so they create their own little backdrop, if you will. But if this is up against or in front of one of your pines or your conifers in your yard, then that just shows off that much more because you'll have these colors. Some are white. I find the white pretty fragrant, but you'll have that up against the evergreen. So I think about that when I'm putting stuff in the ground. If you are trying to add, you know, if you have plans or you've created plans for your yard and you're going to start to plant, I try and plant the big stuff first, and then I'll come in and work a section at a time because the big stuff just takes longer to get established. But I take those things into consideration. I'm going to want some height here, and I know I want some lilacs. Well, this height I want evergreen because of my neighbors, so I'm planting a columnar Arizona cypress or Vanderwolf pine or something like that, and then what? That's going to be 25 feet. I'll put something that's going to be 6 or 8 feet in front of it. Then I'll put something that's going to be 4 feet in front of that. And then maybe my evergreen or perennial coreopsis and lower stuff in front of that. You can chain them all the way down. Now that's going to die to the ground. These are going to stay with some hedge. This is one of the shrubs that I don't trim when they're naked. You don't want to cut this in the winter because you're going to be cutting off your flowers. So resist that. When you trim it is when you deadhead it. That's the best practice for up here that I have found with these. And again, I was out at somebody's house yesterday. The house is probably 30 years old. The people have been in it 4 or 5 years. And there's lilacs hidden in the shrubbery because they were planted by the original owner. And they've been totally neglected. And of course, they don't look as good as this, but there are remnants of, they're going to bloom any day now, but it's going to be really sparse. And if that's the case, then you reinvigorate that by giving a dam of the mulch around the base, feeding it properly, deep watering it, let it do what its little blooms that it will do, and cut it into shape. You know, lower, don't just cut off the flower, cut down the stem a little bit so that it'll be able to recover and give you flowers on that stem in the spring. Or go in really radical and cut it a foot lower than you want it because it's going to put off that much growth. And resolve yourself to the fact that you might not get as many flowers at that first spring. The way around that, as we talked, is take a look at the plant, deadhead it, go in and take out some of the bigger stalks. That's applicable to your really old butterfly bushes. You could don't just, the term is kind of backwards. It's called raising. It's when you take a building down to the ground. So you're not going to raise the whole plant at once. You're going to cut parts of it out so that you can keep some of it blooming and encourage new growth. When I do that, that's an independent time when I phosphate because cutting it back and I want the roots to grow. You know, I want it to survive in a stronger fashion. Both of these, you want to be careful about the amount of nitrogen you're putting on. You want to go in lower, consistent dosages. That's why our fertilizer is built to do it's 7-4-4. So the 7 is your nitrogen. It breaks down real fast. It's an organic-based product. Chicken scat, bat guano, that kind of thing. You feed quarterly, and when you're buying synthetics, It's difficult to monitor, because you'll buy something that is 7 or 10, 10, 10, or 15, 15, 15. If the product in the bag is a consistent color and it just isn't shaped like beads or something, then it's more than likely byproduct from the cracking plants in the oil and gas industry. You know, they can take those molecular chains and create vitamin C for you to eat. You know, there's a place for oil and gas in your retirement portfolio maybe, but not in your diet, okay? So be careful about that, and what you'll get is real fast growth, and you'll see results, but it's not conducive to a healthy plant. So I not just because it's ours, but through my experience, I really enjoy this stuff. It is organically based, and it's light enough and it breaks down fast enough to where you feed it quarterly. So, and not a year time release. Because it has chicken scat and some other really strong ingredients in it like that, pungent I would say, and I have dogs. So I will take a day when I put them away, or when my wife takes them on a walk or something, that I'll throw my fertilizer underneath it, and that's my opportunity to deep water that plant. I start the breaking down process and the activation process by hosing it in the ground. So I'll pick, I'm going to do the first today. I'll throw a cup underneath the plant, I'll take the hose and I'll dissolve it past the availability of the dogs, and that sets it up for a quarter. If you're on a drip system and you throw your fertilizer down and your drip is going off over here, if the fertilizer isn't in the soil, it's not being taken down into the plant. The drips tend to be very localized, and every once in a while you want to go out there with a hose and just give them a good soaking. When you plant anything, whether it's a lilac or not, but today we're talking about lilacs, there's a gallon on the buckets are usually rated in gallons. So if it says pound 3, it's a 3 gallon, pound 7, pound 1. That's the nomenclature for the size of the plant. It will be relevant to the age of the plant. When you plant, you want to make sure, especially if you're setting up on drip, for the first 6 months or so, you're going to give them that amount at least once a week, if not every 3 to 5 days. So, and you want to do it at one time, so that it gets all the way down to the bottom. What happens commonly is someone will say, well, it's going off 15 minutes every other day. Okay, well, you got it. I can't tell you how much is going out unless I know how big your heads are. Your heads are going to be rated at a gallon, 5 gallons an hour on a drip system. And you could very easily, it's real easy to keep the top 4 or 5 inches wet. So when you go and stick your finger in the ground, it feels like it's staying wet. Well, there's roots all the way down to here. And unless you want to stress the plant out, you need to put enough water on it at any given time where the gravity will take the water all the way to the bottom of the hole. And that's the purpose of the deep watering. You can buy a moisture meter, which is very handy for pots. Unless you get a long probe, it's harder to work with your trees and your shrubs. I use a piece of rebar. And it's just like baking. You get the skinnier one that's got the ridges on it. When you've planted it, you have that zone around it where the hole ends and the root ball begins. Every once in a while, I'll go in there and I'll just run it all the way down to the bottom where it taps out, and I'll pull it out and look at it. And you can see the ridges help a lot. Oh, it's sitting in mud. Or this is dusty, like bone dry, and the top is wet. It's real easy to measure it that way. You've got to throttle it up. Your plants many of the plants are not going to show a lot of stress until they're really in trouble. And that is one of the problems, one of the diagnostic issues, is too much water, too little, too frequently, instead of a lot less frequently. It's easier to do on, easier to have all the little drips on the smaller stuff, 4-inch pots, 1-gallon pots. It's pretty easy to get a gallon of water out. It's a little bit harder to get 5 or 6 gallons out. If you have your system set up, each valve box will have an A and a B usually on it, and you want to make sure that you run, you know which ones are which, so that you can have one of those two running longer. And I prefer, when I go up anything above a 4-inch or a 1 gallon, I use the round heads on my sprinkler system that you can dial. And you can buy them 0 to 5, 5 to 12, something like that. But read those and let them weep in. You could trade those out if you have trouble getting everything. It's all going off at the same time. Put bigger heads on those if you can. Or go up and turn them off every once in a while because there's too much water. But you got to probe to find out how you're going to do that. So these, what we brought in, you'll see on the tags, just so you'll understand the tag. Sometimes they'll say hardy to go to zone 4. You're in a zone 7. The lower the number, the colder it's going to be. This one will say, zones 3 to 8. So this one actually tells you where it wants to be grown. That's that particular cultivar, right? There's several different sizes, shapes, colors. Read the label. Ask somebody here about growing them in zone 7. If you want to do some homework, that's the question that you ask. Growing them in zone 7 without light soil. And how do you amend that? But otherwise, we're trying to get everybody here to not make something up and get you the real answer. All right? Any questions? Think about your companion plants. These are going to be big enough to where they're going to want 5 or 6 hours of sun to be able to bloom properly. You can get them in your dappled light real easy. And my lilac is nice and green and it doesn't have any flowers. It could be something as simple as take half of the pine tree down or move it. It's not always just feed it more phosphate. Yes, ma'am.
Kevin, the weather we've been having lately, and it's gotten, the last couple of days, we've had snow 3 and 4 times, and hail. And so if we planted that now and we get that kind of weather, is it going to survive? Do we have to cover it? Do we have to do anything?
No, so the question is, because we've been having intermittent freezes and sometimes some hail, do you wait on planting it? Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. I don't wait. Hail is the one thing that is difficult to protect from. And to go there for a second, I use burlap. Is my go-to for shade and for frost cloth. And the reason is that if I leave it on, it just looks like organic material out in the yard. It's not this bright white or bright green color. Watch the temperatures. So I have a patch of fake grass in the yard, and I had 2 inches of snow on it, and probably half an hour later, there was no snow. And that's just, the atmospheric temperature is cold enough to be snow all the way to the ground, but the ground's too warm and the regular temperature is too warm for it to stick. Look at your weather charts and have a good thermometer in your yard. I've got a little digital that in my laundry room I can tell you what temperature it is in the shade of my back porch. But so I don't have to go out there and read something that broke because it froze. If it's not 20 for an hour or two, or even 25 is kind of the limit there where you'll nip some of the ends. You won't kill the plant, but your blooms might get bit. That's where you see some of the red buds. Well, I have all the buds on them last year, case in point, and then they never flowered and the leaves came out. The buds just fell off because it got cold too long. But when it's going to be 28 or 29 for an hour, at the break of dawn, then that's not cool enough, long enough to hurt the plant. I put strawberries in the ground yesterday. So, the monitor was the one that survived last year is starting to flower, and I wanted a little patch of strawberries. So these are great to plant right now. My peony look better than that, the ones that were left over from last year. They're taller and they're starting to open up. One of them is early blooming, actually has buds on it. So the question is no, but what you are looking for is extended cold, not these brief colds. It's just slowing it down a little bit, and it's moisture that's soaking in slowly. It's actually really nice to have what we've had. It's not so much fun to be digging in plant soil, but it's a really great time to plant stuff. Yes, sir.
Do you guys have dwarf lilacs?
The question is, do we have dwarf lilacs? And because stuff comes and goes, I can't tell you that, but I can tell you. So this bloomerang is 4 foot. That's relatively small. You just have to read the labels. They'll all be clearly labeled. Sometimes we have cheater cards sitting next to them where they're easier to read. You don't need your cheaters to read them. But the information is from the grower, and you still need to ask about it. The bigger the leaf, the taller the plant. So this one's rated at 12 feet.
When you call something a companion plant, what does that mean?
Well, that's a great question because there's several different ways of looking at that. They're on, what do they look like together? When you consider that, you want to consider the same amount of sunshine, most importantly, the same amount of water, how are you feeding it, whether or not you're going to use it as a backdrop for these. Like I said, I like to put evergreens, but they still have to get enough sunshine. So where is that? Facing east, facing west, or whatever, and how much light is that going to really get? Am I going to plant something that's going to block that so it's not going to give me enough light? Right now, I think it was wild iris. I went down and had some coffee, and it was a great big lilac near the front door. Where if it was lower, it probably wouldn't have the flowers, but because it's so high, it's up in the sunshine. And you can see the ones along the street that are getting almost a whole day or in full bloom, or they were going to open. They're really spectacular. But you've got to have the amount of sunlight. The companion nest is whether or not they're going to have enough sunlight and how you're going to water them if they're on the same zone. The azaleas, the rhododendrons, they want more shade than what these want.
Well, I'm curious because you have some columbine there. Being from Colorado, I know that they don't like sun.
No, that is a forest plant.
Yeah.
And these weren't picked because they were companions. They were staged because they were pretty. Some of these, rolling in some of the big trees to show you, we can spend some time walking around and we can talk about that. But when I think companion, I'm thinking design and sun needs. So when I'm on my back porch, if I plant it incorrectly, one is going to hide the view of the other. And I'm not going to be able to enjoy the blooms and the critters that come from the flowers as much. Something else? Yes.
I have a very basic question, but I still don't get it. When you're looking at your fertilizer, it says 744. You said the first one is nitrogen.
Yes.
Which one's phosphorus?
Second.
The second one, and which one is the third one?
Potash.
Potash. And what is that?
It's all around. It's for the general health of the plant. Phosphate or phosphorus is the center number, and it's a root food with side effects of flowers, or it's your flowering stuff. There is a chemical-based product that I do use, and it is ours, and it's the. So I'm sorry, I didn't repeat that for those that are online. The question was, what do the numbers mean? Where nitrogen, phosphate or phosphorus, and then potash. And it's essentially up, down, and all around. The center number is what we're talking about for your root food and for your flowering, which are your phosphorus and phosphate. We have a product called Flower Power, and it's a soluble. You put a scoop per gallon, and you water things with it. Yeah, and so this is about as strong as you can get for phosphate. It's 1248. It's about as much phosphate as you can put in stuff and keep it blooming. When you see these hanging baskets are an ideal example. They're pushed to be blooming. You take it home and you water it, give it the right sun, and you end up in short order with maybe a month or two, but you'll end up with a really pretty green plant with a couple of flowers on it. Well, how do I get it to keep looking like it was when I bought it? Well, about 2 weeks in, you start feeding it. And then you'll keep the look, the flower that it was sold to you as. I use this, if I don't have my granular phosphate, I use this on my flowering shrubs in the fall. I set the root system up for good, healthy growth, and I set them up to bloom strong in the spring. Yes?
Part B of that question goes back to the nitrogen. You said that you feed nitrogen quarterly. Do you feed the 744 quarterly, or is there a separate product strictly with nitrogen?
So do I feed the nitrogen quarterly, and is there a separate product for nitrogen? There's a couple of answers to that. Yes. I don't augment nitrogen unless it shows me. That's why I don't like potting soils, bedding, dirt, or anything that's already got fertilizer in it, because you don't know when the plant starts stressing what to add, because you don't know what it, it comes impregnated, and you start having troubles with the plant. I'll buy regular mulch or our potting soil, and I can add as I diagnose. The 744 is all the nitrogen that I need on most stuff. I don't augment nitrogen unless it's something I want immediate results from, like tomatoes. I will use this flower power on tomatoes. I will push them to bloom and grow like crazy, because we got a short window to get as many tomatoes as possible. No flowers, no fruit, right? In your fruit, not just peaches, but tomatoes and squash, there's what we call blossom end rot. And you'll see it. Where the flower falls off of the fruit, it will turn brown. And hence the name blossom end rot. But that is not a bug. That is a calcium deficiency. And when you feed your peaches and your tomatoes, your jalapenos, carrots, calcium, they're going to be sweeter. I don't know the science behind that. It's just been my experience. You can eat all the eggs you want and grind up your eggshells and put them in your bed. There's nothing wrong with that, but that's a season away from availability. You can buy calcium nitrate and feed that to your tomatoes. Blossom end rot goes away. The fruit is better. The hesitation on that, or the caveat there, calcium nitrate, as it breaks down, turns to nitrogen. So you don't want to add nitrogen and then put calcium nitrate on your plant. Just ask.
Okay.
Another question?
Well, you just,
One opens up another one, yes.
here's my peaches. I'm ready to put 744 on.
You are.
But does that have the calcium that will improve the fruit?
No. But whether or not you need it, but what you can do, we saw this as a problem, and 3 or 4 years ago, what we were doing was prescribing this and then a bag of the calcium nitrate. And if you'll go in there, you will see plant food for fruit and veggies. And we've taken it and put it in there. So you can buy the fruit and vegetable waters mixed. The issue with organics, and we can talk to GMOs a little bit here. Organics, the regulations on it are strict enough that once you add a mineral, you have to take the name organic off the label. So we go through great lengths and do, you know, range-free chickens that aren't fed GMO grains, and then add calcium to it, we can't call it organic. You know, use that for the chicken scat. You know, they go through, it's just, say, in some instances, a little overboard. But it's the same feeling about GMOs that cause people to be kind of freaked out about it. And there's some instances where, like, the wheat grain is so modified that it's, that's where our, what's the name of it, the particular element that everybody's allergic to. Oh, what's that? Gluten, yeah. So the gluten's all distorted. It's not the same wheat as it was. And if you just take the white out, the highly refined stuff out, you'll find that your gluten response rate will be minimized. There's actually a book called Wheat Belly, which talks about how those of us that consume a lot of bread, how we respond differently to the new wheat. However, you wouldn't have a lot of what we have if it wasn't for genetic modification, because the farming industry has cultivated plants to grow better, and it's just by, it's genetically modified once you do a graft. You know, it's genetically modified if you do a slip cut and put it onto something else. You isolate a color, it's genetically modified. You make a tomato stronger so it's less, so it's more disease resistant, it's genetically modified. More often than not, that stuff is for your benefit than it is for your detriment. But you need to just do your homework. So, yeah, GMOs are people that are all scared that it's, you know, we probably wouldn't have a lot of what we have if it wasn't for it. So, but yes, the answer is feed your fruit trees now and do the fruit and vegetable mix. And then the quarterly is, you don't have to wait till the next event. Just keep it in mind. And it's general. You can be a week or a month off. But if you feed in the fall and you feed in the spring, there's 2, right? It's 3 months apart. So water it in when you put it in, unless you use salt. Oh, when you go along with those lines, I like to keep my, if you see ladybugs on some of your plants right now, they're naturally occurring. There's a high likelihood that you have aphids on that plant, because the ladybugs are there to eat the aphids. So you have to decide if you want to spray that plant or not. And when you follow, what I try and do is I will use organic-based fungicides, and some of the sprays that are specifically for non-vertebrates. So it will affect a caterpillar, but the bird can eat the caterpillar that you slow down, it won't affect the bird. You'll see B in the label, or Bacchus, which just means it's bacterial based, and that's as it breaks down faster. It's a more organic product. You'll see that in the label. Look for your pyrethrins, pyrethrum or pyrethrin. That's the chrysanthemum-based toxin. That's as old as you can get. It's actually the chrysanthemum from Albania, and that area is one of the more toxic ones. And they used to just take the dust and the powder, the dried flowers, and carry them in bags around the horses and stuff like that. They knew it worked, and they weren't sure why, but this flower kills flies and ticks and fleas and stuff like that. I used to spray it on my legs to keep the ticks off of me, and I keep having to cut that third arm off, but it's not that big of a deal. No, it's real clean, it breaks down quickly, and so you just know your product, but you have to make decisions sometimes. because you're gonna kill all the bugs if you spray that. One of the ways that you're gonna be able to tell, especially on your conifers right now, if you have a problem, look for shiny gravel underneath it. And that is then leaking, which means they're being bitten. They'll have aphids or mealybugs or scale will be causing the tree to respond, and its response is to try and suffocate its predator by putting out sap. You gotta decide whether or not it's worth spraying or you just let the season go through. Yes, sir.
Yes, your thoughts on the use of neem oil?
Neem oil, good question. Neem oil on killing things and an effective fungicide. I like to use it in the fall and in the spring, and it's almost too late. This is my opinion. The science behind it is oils don't respond well to sunshine and heat. It's not necessarily toxin. Sometimes it'll just be called horticultural oil. And you can read the label. It might be mineral oil, it might be neem oil, it might be canola oil. But you're suffocating the larvae that were laid on the plant. When it was summer, it started to get cool, the bugs are reproducing, so they hide a bunch of eggs on the bark. And you can spray the plant in the fall, right after the foliage falls off. Or if you want the foliage to fall off, then you can spray the plant heavy and it'll suffocate the leaves. And they'll all go dormant. It's a technique in the south where you have inconsistent first freeze. But you hose down the plant, get it dripping wet, walk around it, make sure you get all the bark. And then in the spring, like now, when the buds start to swell before it flowers, before those open up, then you can do it again. That'll give you a leapfrog on your pest. You'll be way ahead because you'll have suffocated the larvae on the bark, especially scale, because the scale do breathe through that shell. And you can kill a lot of it without having to use any toxins. Once it starts to warm up and you're spraying that on your plants, then you run the risk of it burning or clogging the pores of the leaves. Yes, sir.
Now, you mentioned canola oil, and that's a petroleum-based product. You have a vegetable base like corn oil or avocado.
You have to read the label. The canola is a seed. It is a plant out of Canada. And but you want to you just read the label, because if it's called horticultural oil, then it's open for what they want to use. If it's called neem oil, it should be neem oil. So, but you can put it on your skin usually, or it's just not that. It's a non-toxin that is used to suffocate. But because of the lack of air, it's an effective fungicide. But in its effectiveness, people continue to use it, and you can actually damage the plants. Yes, ma'am.
So spraying plants like I did last week, roses.
Yeah.
They've not started to bud yet. Is that too early?
No, that's ideal.
Okay. And with this heavy.
I'm sorry.
And with the snow that we had and hail for the last 2 days, did it wash it off? Do I need to do it again?
So the question is specifically for roses, and did she spray them last week? We've had some snow and some hail, and does she need to reapply? Was it too early? The question is, what is it you applied?
It was neem oil.
Okay, so she put neem oil on. No, it's an ideal time to spray neem oil on roses. I would go in and take out whatever you think is dead. Take out right now because you won't be able to see it or get to it, and that's a real haven for the bugs. So roses this time of year, you do want to soak the bark, and it will stay on because it penetrates a little bit, but it is considered an oil or almost a wax. And it's hydrogenated so that it can dissolve in water, and a pump-up sprayer is fine. Just be careful if you're doing a sprayer as opposed to the term, or you'll see RTU on some things, and that's ready to use. How technical is that? So this is ready to use because you just hook it on. The hand sprayers are ready to use, and they're already mixed to the right dilution ratio. But yeah, roses right now, it's a great time for preventive. And if I just have the neem oil for my roses, I buy this in the non-RTU, just in a concentrate. Cyanide is one of my favorites. And I'll put a couple of drops in my neem oil. And that's just kind of like overkill. But I've sprayed all my trees going into the fall, and I've sprayed them all already, and my roses. And I've got a lot of sunshine on the rose side of the house, and none of my roses lost all their leaves. So, but you go in, you clean out all of that, and roses, big bloomers, perfect time to add phosphate.
Good.
Okay, we have, if you are not already on our email list, put your name and number down, or your email. That'll get you just tips and how to,
80% discount,
how to order. How's that?
80% discount.
Sure. You have 80% discount on linen trees, okay? Which we will never carry, that or avocado. So if it's on my lot, so that's a perfect example of my sarcasm, the tearing of my friend's flesh here. We won't have the stuff that doesn't grow up here. Or it will be labeled that, if you're gonna take this, put it in a pot and drag it in the winter. So people come in, oh, I want a lemon. No, just you have to dry figs. So we've curated is a word that's overused, I think, now, just because it's maybe a cool word, but that just means selected. Oftentimes, we will go out, the family will go out and say, I want that row of trees, I don't want those. They will meet with these people a couple of times a year, depending on what they're growing, but we're not hand-picking individual plants. But we're picking the species, the ones that look the best, the ones that produce the best, especially on your fruit trees, for the area. So, if you need me, I'm here for classes and for individual consults. You'll be successful. Follow these instructions. You'll grow really pretty lilacs. Thank you.